In the glittering heart of London, where wealth and power converge in a dance of elegance, a soldier named Malcolm Bennett stepped into the Sovereign Room, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. His scarlet tunic, adorned with the insignia of the Queen's Guard, was a beacon of tradition. His towering bearskin hat a symbol of service. In his hand, he clutched a letter sealed with the golden crest of Buckingham Palace, an invitation to a meal meant to honor his years of sacrifice. But as he crossed the threshold, the air thickened with judgment, eyes narrowed, whispers hissed, and a glass of red wine would soon stain his chest, not by accident, but by design. They called his uniform a costume, a mockery of the honor it represented. Yet, by morning, a phone call from the palace would turn this night of humiliation into a story that would resonate far beyond the restaurant's gilded walls. A testament to a man whose dignity transforms scorn into a lesson for all. Malcolm Bennett was no stranger to adversity. At 30, he was a sergeant in the Queen's Guard, a veteran of 15 years in the British Army, with a medal for bravery earned in the crucible of Afghanistan. To the tourists who flocked to Buckingham Palace, snapping photos as he stood motionless in his ceremonial garb, he was a picturesque figure, a relic of tradition. But to those who knew him, his comrades, his commanding officers, the men who had faced death beside him, he was a legend, a man whose courage and compassion defined him. Born in a gritty corner of Manchester, Malcolm grew up in a world of hard work and modest means. His father, a factory worker with calloused hands, taught him the value of duty. His mother, a nurse who tended to the broken, showed him the power of kindness. At Tushi, he enlisted, driven by a quiet resolve to serve something greater than himself. In Afghanistan, he led his squad through ambushes, pulling wounded men to safety under a hail of bullets. His medal, pinned to his chest by a general in a somber ceremony, was a tribute to his valor. But Malcolm wore it not for pride, but for the memory of those who never returned. In London, his role in the Queen's Guard demanded a different kind of strength. Standing guard for hours, unmoving in the blistering heat of summer or the biting cold of winter, required a discipline that tested body and mind. The bearskin hat, weighing nearly 2 pounds, pressed against his scalp. The woolen tunic, thick and unyielding, trapped heat against his skin. Yet Malcolm never faltered. To him, the ceremony was not pageantry, but a vow, a continuation of the oath he had sworn to protect his country. His comrades admired him, not just for his skill, but for his heart. Bennett's the kind of man who'd take a bullet for you and then apologize for the mess, one soldier said, only half joking. His reputation was built on moments of quiet heroism, like the time he carried a wounded comrade 3 miles through a desert storm, or when he spent his leave volunteering at a veterans shelter, listening to old soldiers recount battles long forgotten. On the day that would change his life, Malcolm's selflessness shone brighter than ever. A fellow guard, a close friend named Tom, had been rushed to hospital with a sudden illness, leaving a gap in the roster. Without hesitation, Malcolm volunteered for a double shift, 12 hours of standing sentinel under a relentless summer sun. The heat was oppressive, the air thick with humidity, the pavement radiating warmth through his polished boots. Tourists milled about, their cameras flashing, their voices a constant hum. Some tossed coins at his feet, mistaking him for a street performer. Others mocked his stillness, waving hands in front of his face. Malcolm's eyes remained fixed, his body rigid, his mind focused. Not a single complaint crossed his lips. He thought of Tom, fighting for his life in a sterile ward, and drew strength from the bond they shared. As the sun sank below the horizon, Malcolm's shift finally ended. His muscles ached. His uniform clung to his sweat-soaked skin. On exhaustion, tugged at his bones. But before he could retreat to the barracks, Captain Redgrave, a grizzled officer who had fought alongside him in Afghanistan, called him over. Redgrave's face, usually etched with the sternness of command, softened with a rare warmth. "You went above and beyond today, Bennett," he said, his voice gruff but sincere. "You deserve something special." From his pocket, he produced an envelope, its cream paper embossed with the royal crest, its wax seal gleaming in the fading light. Inside was a voucher for a meal at the Sovereign Room, London's most prestigious restaurant, a place where the powerful dined on caviar and ambition. "This is from me," Redgrave said, clapping Malcolm on the shoulder. "And it's got the Palace's blessing. Go enjoy yourself." Malcolm hesitated. He was a man of simple tastes, more comfortable with a pint and a pie in a corner pub than a multi-course meal in a Michelin-starred establishment. The idea of dining among London's elite felt foreign, almost intrusive, but the gesture and the weight of the letter stirred something in him. It was not just a meal, it was recognition, a nod to the years he had given to his country. "Thank you, sir," he said, tucking the envelope into his tunic. Redgrave's eyes twinkled. "Wear the uniform," he added. "Show them what it means to be one of us." Malcolm decided to honor Redgrave's words. He would wear his uniform, not out of arrogance, but out of pride. After a quick wash and a moment to steady himself, he boarded the Underground, his scarlet tunic and bearskin hat drawing stares from commuters. Some gawked, others smiled. An elderly man, his jacket adorned with a faded regimental pin, caught Malcolm's eye. "I served in Korea," the man said, his voice soft but proud. "Different uniform, same heart." Malcolm nodded, a silent acknowledgement of their shared bond. A young woman, her earbuds dangling, stood and offered her seat. "Thank you for what you do," she said, her smile genuine. A child, clutching his mother's hand, pointed and whispered, "Is he a real soldier?" The mother nodded, her eyes warm. "The bravest kind." The journey was a reminder of why Malcolm served not for glory, but for the people who understood the weight of his oath. By the time he reached Mayfair, where the Sovereign Room stood like a monument to luxury, he felt ready to represent his regiment, his country, and himself. The restaurant's facade was all glass and gold, its name etched in elegant script above the entrance. Malcolm straightened his tunic, adjusted his hat, and stepped inside, the letter clutched tightly in his hand. He expected an evening of honor. What he found was something else entirely. The Sovereign Room was a world apart from the barracks or the battlefield. Its walls were draped in velvet, its chandeliers casting a soft glow over tables set with crystal and silver. The air was scented with truffle and rosemary, the hum of conversation laced with the clink of glasses. Diners in tailored suits and designer gowns glanced up as Malcolm entered, their expressions a mix of curiosity and disdain. To them, he was an oddity, a man out of place in their rarefied world. The hostess, a woman with sleek hair and a practiced smile, approached him, her eyes lingering on his uniform. "Do you have a reservation, sir?" she asked, her tone implying he had wandered into the wrong establishment. Malcolm presented the letter, its royal seal unmistakable. The hostess's smile tightened, her fingers hesitating as she took the envelope. She scanned its contents, her eyebrow arching slightly. "Very well," she said, her voice clipped. "Follow me." But instead of leading him to a prime table in the restaurant's heart, she guided him to a corner near the kitchen, a dimly lit spot where the clatter of pots and the rush of waiters drowned out the elegance. The message was clear: "You are not one of us." Malcolm took his seat, his posture as composed as it was on parade. But inside, he felt the sting of her dismissal. The service was a master class in passive aggression. Waiters lingered at other tables, their laughter reserved for wealthier patrons, their attention fleeting when it came to Malcolm. A young waiter named Sebastian approached, his smirk as sharp as the knife he carried. "Quite the costume," he remarked, gesturing to Malcolm's tunic. "Planning a parade after dinner." Malcolm met his gaze, his face calm, but his eyes steady. "It's not a costume," he said simply. "It's my uniform." Sebastian's smirk widened. "Right," he said, handing over a menu. "This might be a bit complex for a simpler palate. Shall I recommend something basic?" Malcolm ordered a modest meal roast lamb, a glass of water, his voice steady despite the insult. But the slides continued, each one a needle meant to provoke. Another waiter forgot to bring his water. A busboy bumped his chair, muttering under his breath. The diners at nearby tables whispered, their glances sharp with amusement. And then came the wine. Sebastian, carrying a bottle of Bordeaux, approached with exaggerated care, his eyes glinting with mischief. As he passed Malcolm's table, his hand tilted, sending a cascade of red wine across the soldier's chest. The liquid soaked into the scarlet wool, a vivid stain that spread like a wound. The restaurant fell silent for a heartbeat, then buzzed with stifled laughter and gasps. "Oh, my apologies," Sebastian said, his tone dripping with insincerity. "These things happen." Malcolm looked down at the stain, then back at the waiter. His jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "This uniform has seen worse," he said, "and it's worth more than your apology." The words hung in the air, a quiet rebuke that seemed to unsettle the room. But the humiliation was not over. The manager, a man named Charles, was summoned. His suit was immaculate, his demeanor polished, but his eyes were cold. "I'm afraid this establishment has a certain standard," he said, his voice smooth but patronizing. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable elsewhere. A pub might be more your speed." The implication was unmistakable. Malcolm was an outsider, his presence an inconvenience. The other diners watched, some with pity, others with amusement. As Malcolm stood, his meal untouched, he folded the letter, tucked it into his pocket, and walked out, the weight of every eye in the room on his back. The stain on his tunic was a mark of shame, but his head remained high, his steps measured, his dignity intact. Malcolm returned to the barracks that night, the events of the evening a heavy burden. He cleaned his uniform as best he could, scrubbing at the wine stain until his fingers ached. But the mark remained, a reminder of the disrespect he had endured. He thought of Captain Redgrave, of the pride in the officer's voice when he handed over the letter. He thought of his comrades, of the men he had fought beside, of the oath he had sworn. And he thought of his parents, whose lessons in resilience and compassion had carried him through darker moments than this. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it was deep. A soldier's rest earned through endurance. The next morning, Malcolm was back at his post outside Buckingham Palace, his uniform as pristine as he could make it, his face a mask of stoicism. The stain was faint but visible, a shadow against the scarlet fabric. He stood as he always did, unmoving, his eyes fixed on the horizon, his mind disciplined. He said nothing to his comrades about the previous night, his silence a shield against their questions. But Captain Redgrave, inspecting the guard, noticed the mark. "What's this, Bennett?" he asked, his voice sharp with concern. Malcolm hesitated, then recounted the story not with anger, but with a quiet resignation that spoke volumes. Redgrave's face darkened, his eyes narrowing, as Malcolm described the hostess's skepticism, Sebastian's mockery, and Charles's dismissal. "They called your uniform a costume," he said, his voice low but laced with fury. "They poured wine on you and told you to leave." Malcolm nodded, his expression unchanged. "It's done, sir," he said. No need to make a fuss. But Redgrave was already moving, his boots echoing on the cobblestones as he strode to his office. He picked up the phone and dialed a number few had access to, his voice steady but commanding. On the other end was Richard Montgomery, the owner of the Sovereign Room and a former soldier who had served in the Falklands. Montgomery was in Edinburgh when the call came, but Redgrave's words cut through the distance like a blade. "One of our own was disrespected," Redgrave said, "in your restaurant. Fix this." Montgomery was a man who understood the weight of service. He had enlisted as a young man, fought in the bitter winds of the South Atlantic, and carried the scars both visible and hidden of his time in uniform. He had built the Sovereign Room not just as a business, but as a legacy. A place where excellence was a creed. The idea that a soldier, a man like Malcolm, had been treated with such contempt in his establishment was unthinkable. He booked the next flight to London, his mind racing with questions and resolve. By noon, he was in his office, the restaurant's sleek decor, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within him. He summoned the staff involved with the hostess, Charles, and Sebastian, his voice calm but edged with steel. "You insulted a man who's risked his life for this country," he said, his eyes boring into each of them. "You shamed a soldier who's worth more than this entire room. Explain yourselves." The hostess, whose name was Clara, stammered, her confidence crumbling. I didn't know who he was," she said. "I thought he was just dressed up." Charles, the manager, shifted uncomfortably. "It was a misunderstanding," he said. "We have a certain clientele, and he didn't fit the profile." Sebastian, his smirk long gone, muttered, "It was a joke. I didn't mean any harm." Montgomery's gaze hardened. "A joke," he said. "You poured wine on a man's uniform, mocked his service, and called it a joke. That uniform has seen battlefields you can't imagine. It's been worn by men who died for this country, and you dared to call it a costume." The staff stood in silence, their excuses wilting under Montgomery's scrutiny. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You have one chance to make this right," he said, "and it starts tonight." He dismissed them with a wave, then picked up the phone again, this time to arrange something unprecedented. Malcolm would return to the Sovereign Room, but this time it would be on his terms. That evening, a black Bentley pulled up outside the barracks, its polished exterior gleaming under the streetlights. Malcolm, still in his stained uniform, was escorted to the car by a driver who saluted him with the respect of a fellow serviceman. "Where are we going?" Malcolm asked, his voice tinged with confusion. "Back to where you belong," the driver replied, a hint of a smile in his eyes. When the car stopped in front of the Sovereign Room, Malcolm's stomach tightened. He had no desire to relive the previous night's ordeal, but something in the driver's demeanor told him this was different. As he stepped through the restaurant's doors, the scene was unrecognizable. The staff lined up at the entrance, their faces a mix of shame and deference. A pianist, seated at a grand piano in the corner, played God Save the Queen, the notes filling the air with solemn pride. The diners, fewer this time, but no less attentive, watched in silence. Montgomery greeted Malcolm personally, his handshake firm, his eyes warm with respect. "This should never have happened," he said, "and it won't again. You have my word as a soldier." One by one, the staff approached. Clara, the hostess, stepped forward, her voice trembling. "I was wrong," she said, her eyes meeting Malcolm's for the first time. "I judged you without knowing you." "I'm sorry." Charles, the manager, followed, his polished facade gone. "I was arrogant," he admitted. "I failed to see the man behind the uniform. I hope you can forgive me." Sebastian, his bravado replaced by unease, was last. "I deserve to be sacked," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What I did was unforgivable." Malcolm listened, his expression unreadable, his silence a weight that pressed against the room. Montgomery turned to him. "They've been given a choice," he said. "Resign, or let you decide their fate. This is your call, Sergeant." The restaurant was silent, every eye on Malcolm. He looked at each of them, Clara, Charles, Sebastian, his gaze steady but not unkind. For a moment, he was back in Afghanistan, standing over a wounded comrade, deciding in an instant who would live and who would fall. This was different, but the weight was the same. "An apology isn't easy," he said finally, his voice slow and deliberate. "But learning from a mistake is harder. If they're truly sorry, I don't want them to lose their jobs. I want them to understand." The room exhaled, the tension breaking like a wave. Montgomery nodded, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "You're a better man than most I've met," he said. "And I've met a lot of good men." He gestured to the finest table in the restaurant, set with crystal and silver, its view overlooking the twinkling lights of Mayfair. "Tonight, you're our guest, not just of the sovereign room, but of every soldier who's ever worn the uniform." The meal was exquisite, a parade of dishes that Malcolm, with his soldier's palate, could scarcely name foie gras, dover sole, a dessert that seemed to melt on the tongue. But it was the conversation that lingered. Montgomery joined him, sharing stories of his own time in the Falklands, of battles fought and lessons learned. The staff, now humbled, moved with a quiet efficiency, their service impeccable. Sebastian, his hands steady this time, poured Malcolm's water with care, his eyes lowered in respect. Clara checked on him frequently, her smile genuine. Charles, stationed at the edge of the room, watched with a newfound humility. As the meal drew to a close, Montgomery raised a glass of aged whiskey, its amber glow catching the light. "Whether it's serving in the army, a palace, or a restaurant," he said, "when it's done with heart, it's noble. You reminded us of that." "Malcolm," the soldier nodded, his silence more eloquent than words. For the first time that evening, a small smile tugged at his lips. He thought of his parents, of Redgrave, of Tom fighting in the hospital. He thought of the uniform, its stain, a badge of endurance, its scarlet, a symbol of sacrifice. When Malcolm left, the staff stood in a line, their eyes following him into the night. The pianist played a final note. The diners rose in a quiet gesture of respect, and Montgomery shook his hand once more. "Come back any time," he said. "This is your home now." Malcolm nodded, his bearskin hat casting a shadow on the pavement. The stain on his tunic would fade with time, but the lesson would endure, a lesson in dignity, in grace, in the power of standing tall when the world tries to bring you low. In the days that followed, Malcolm's story spread. A journalist, dining at the Sovereign Room that second night, wrote an article that went viral, shared across social media, with captions like "The soldier who taught us honor" and "A uniform worth more than gold." People commented with their own stories of prejudice faced, of dignity preserved, of moments when they chose compassion over anger. In Manchester, Malcolm's parents read the article, their eyes wet with pride. In the hospital, Tom, recovering slowly, watched a video of the event on his phone, a grin spreading across his face. "That's my mate," he said to the nurse. Malcolm returned to his duties, his uniform cleaned, his heart steady. He stood guard, as he always had, his eyes fixed, his body still, his mind at peace. The tourists still snapped photos, the coins still clinked at his feet. But now, some paused to salute, their gestures clumsy but sincere. Redgrave, passing by on an inspection, gave him a nod, a silent acknowledgement of a battle well fought. The Sovereign Room implemented new training, ensuring every staff member understood the value of respect, no matter who walked through the door. Montgomery sent Malcolm a letter, not on palace stationery, but in his own hand, thanking him for reminding an old soldier what service truly meant. Malcolm's story was a reminder that honor is not in the uniform, but in the heart that wears it. It was a call to look beyond appearances, to see the humanity in those we might dismiss. It was a testament to the power of forgiveness, of choosing understanding over retribution. If you were in Malcolm's place, what would you have done? Have you ever faced scorn and chosen grace? His tale invites us to reflect on the moments that define us, the choices that shape us, and the legacy we leave behind. Share your story, and let it be a spark that lights the way for others.